Okay, so we are still talking about the entire realm of Sub-Saharan Africa. Let's get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the colonial period. Okay, so around the 1800s, there was something known as the Berlin Conference. As I'd said before, Europeans had been colonizing and had interests in all different areas of Africa by now. By the 1800s, that slave trade had gone into full swing, and there was diamond mining here, minerals. Africa has so many natural resources, and Europeans and the U.S. were here with various interests all over Africa, and were haggling over these places. And the Berlin Conference was convened in the 1800s to settle these claims. The major contenders at that time were Germany, France, Belgium, and Portugal, I believe. There were others, Italy, and the United States, of course, but what's important is that the Berlin Conference did carve up Africa into these boundaries that we've spoken of before. So, decolonization period occurred around the late 1800s and kept on going, with various states becoming independent until the late 1900s. So as you can see, African governments are relatively early. A lot of people, as I said, there's a lot of negative feeling worldwide towards Africa, culturally and socially, as ironically, as considering Africa as being backwards, uncivilized, and so much of that is so ironic because this is where civilization and humanity itself arose. It's our mother culture. It's the roots of our humanness are in Africa. And so this is another thing that's so tragic about what was to come, and also the state of Africa today, how Africa was so set behind by these various factors that we're discussing. And yet, what we have to remember too is that in a way, Africa today has the most growth potential. So while it has lagged behind the most economically, socially, culturally, has been so damaged by so many different things that occurred here, it's also ready to spring forth with the most potential growth today. And so there's a lot of excitement in Africa today economically. So getting a little bit more into that, there's a very big lack of infrastructure in Africa, and the colonization, not to be negative towards one group of people or another, because I really believe this. I know that tragic things have happened all over the world, and people have been colonizing each other from the beginning. It's never right to take over someone's land and people, but it's happened all over. It's happened pretty much everywhere. Everywhere that you look, there were peoples that took over peoples that took over peoples, and where did it all begin? We don't know where it began. Well, yeah, it began in Africa, and then the migration, and then successive waves of people that just took over after each other. And it really happened in a big way here. This might be the best example. So land, very important. And again, there was this interior where people were farmers for the most part. This was traditionally a farming society and cultures and tribes. Farming and livestock, and a very different way socially of doing land. So that's what I want to talk about, the focus of this particular section. So land and socially, land tenure is how peoples take care of lands. And so this is really what happened between the colonizers that came into Africa and the peoples that were living here. There was such a different way of dealing with land. Now, when the colonizers came in, they thought, like happened here, that nobody owned the land because there weren't any boundaries. But it was just done differently. Land is community owned. Also, marriages can be very different too, and it's tied up with the land. So in Africa, there can be a man can have many wives, but he only has as many wives as he can take care of. And women, culturally, women, as soon as they were able to conceive children, very, very young women would become married, and even before sometimes, and leave their families, and they would go with their husband into a place where now it's a community of wives and houses and children with a headman. And so it's a very different land is communally owned then. And so when Europeans come in with very different ideas of land tenure, they see it as not being owned by anyone, or that the headman can just take the rights of all the people that are living there and pretty much transfer them over. So so there was small farming before that was all related to marriages and clans and the African customs that weren't understood by Europeans and other colonial peoples that came in and didn't understand. People in the US too. And other places also. There's been Russians, a lot of Russian influence here, especially during the Cold War, and now Chinese. So there have been lots of peoples besides the Europeans who have come in looking for resources. But back then, it wasn't understood that this wasn't just free for the taking. It wasn't just empty. There were people, they were using it. And often these people were maybe a headman of a whole community, paid very little, and then the land taken, and what are the people to do? They had no say in this. And so, especially during what was to come was the Green Revolution.